The kidnappers pulled me out of the gala at 9:47 p.m., wearing my sister Vivian's borrowed emerald necklace. And when my parents called the detective back 40 minutes later, their first question wasn't whether I was alive. It was whether they could still get her back. Nobody explains a question like that to you right away. You have to earn it, the same way I'd earned everything else in the Calloway family, slowly, by watching, by being the daughter who didn't ask for things out loud. I was 26 years old, and I had spent every one of those years as the spare. Vivian came first, 3 years earlier than she was supposed to, 4 pounds and blue around the mouth, and my parents built the rest of their lives around never almost losing her again. I came second, healthy, unremarkable, and grew up understanding my job without anyone stating it. Don't need what your sister might also need. There wouldn't be enough left over. Calloway Textile Group had been my great-grandfather's company, and by the time I was old enough to read a balance sheet, it was quietly dying. Overseas mills had gutted our margins for a decade. The banks had stopped returning my father's calls with any warmth in them. So when Weston Kingsley started courting Vivian at an industry dinner 2 years ago, my father didn't see a son-in-law standing in the doorway. He saw $400 million of capital wearing a nice suit. Harold Kingsley's people had insisted, from the very first conversations, on what they called protections before any ink dried on the merger, guarantees my father waved off in front of me as ordinary lawyer language, the kind of thing that always sounds more sinister described than it turns out to be. I believed him, the way I believed most things he waved off in front of me. I didn't hate Vivian for any of that, and I want to say so plainly before the rest of this happens, because it matters later. She didn't ask to be born early. She didn't ask to become the daughter our parents decided was too fragile to ever disappoint. She got the gilded cage. I got the room next to it, close enough to hear everything happening inside, useful enough to keep around, never quite valuable enough to matter first. What I did instead of mattering was fix locks. It started with my grandmother's jewelry box the summer I was 14, a small brass mechanism rusted shut, and it turned into something my mother described at a dinner party, in front of 11 guests, as George's little locksmith phase, with a laugh that made sure everyone understood it was a phase and not a life. It was never a phase. By 26 I had a workshop in the old carriage house behind the estate, a waitlist of auction houses who trusted me with Victorian puzzle boxes, and pre-war safes nobody else wanted to touch, and calloused fingertips my mother asked me, more than once, to keep out of family photographs. Every auction house I worked with wanted photographs of a mechanism before I opened it, for their own insurance files, proof of condition in case anything went wrong in the process. I photographed first and touched second, always out of habit more than instruction by that point. It never once occurred to me that habit would matter to anyone but an insurance adjuster I'd never met. That Thursday, the gala existed for one reason, to announce the merger. Kingsley Holdings and Calloway Textile Group, 400 guests, a photographer from a business magazine, and Vivian on Weston's arm in a dress the exact color of the necklace she was wearing for the first and only time that night. 3 generations old, on loan from the Kingsley family, the way you'd preview ownership of something before the paperwork made it official. She hated it within an hour, said it itched her collarbone, said the clasp bit at her neck every time she turned her head. At 8:50, in the mirror of the ladies' room, she took it off her own throat and settled it around mine instead. "You never get to wear anything nice," she said, tucking a loose curl behind my ear like we were girls again. "Wear it for an hour. Nobody will even notice it's not me." I want you to remember that she said that. I want you to remember exactly how kind it sounded, because I believed it was kind for 4 more days. They took me from the side entrance near the valet stand, the one exit nobody had bothered telling security to watch, because nobody important ever used it. 2 men, a dark van, a cloth pressed over my mouth that smelled like a hospital and a hardware store at the same time. I fought it for exactly as long as it took my body to stop listening to me. I woke zip-tied to a folding chair in a room that smelled like motor oil and cold concrete, one bare bulb overhead swinging very slightly, like someone had just walked underneath it. There were 3 of them. I only learned that later, but only one of them crouched to my eye level first, checked that the tie at my wrists wasn't cutting off the blood, and said quietly, like it cost him something to admit it, "You're not who we were told to get." His name, as far as I knew then, was Nash, Dark Eyes. A voice that stayed level no matter what the other 2 were doing around him. a habit of angling his body slightly between me and the door every time it opened, like it was a reflex he hadn't decided to have yet. "Who were you told to get?" I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt, which surprised both of us. "Doesn't matter now," he straightened. "You're the one in the necklace." That was the first moment I understood I hadn't been a target. I had been a costume. The one running the room, a heavy-set man with a permanent constructionite sunburn named Marcus Doyle, wanted to move forward anyway. Said one Calloway daughter sounded the same as another over the phone, said the money wouldn't know the difference. Nash argued him down, said sloppy jobs get whole crews caught, said somebody needed to call it in before anyone did something they couldn't undo. I didn't yet know that calling it in meant calling a woman named Renata Cole. I didn't know that Renata Cole's answer, relayed back into that cold garage 40 minutes later, would be the first crack in everything I had ever believed about my own family. Nash was the one who told me. Not gently, gentleness wasn't really available to either of us in that room, but honestly, which I would come to understand mattered a great deal more. "Your parents called the detective back," he said. "First thing out of your mother's mouth. It wasn't your name." Some part of me already knew, the way you know a stair is missing before your foot finds the gap. What did she ask instead? He looked at me a beat too long, like he was deciding whether I could survive the answer. Whether it was too late to still get your sister. I laughed. I want that on the record too, because it's the part I understand least in hindsight. I actually laughed, one short broken sound, because it seemed like the kind of thing a person says when a joke has gone wrong, not the kind of thing a mother asks about her missing daughter. Nash didn't laugh. That was how I knew it wasn't a joke. 3 weeks earlier, in a glass office 40 floors above the harbor, Emery Voss had pulled the same file for the 4th time that month. Voss Sentinel underwrote more kidnap and ransom policies than any private firm on the eastern seaboard, which meant Emery saw the ugly arithmetic of other people's fear cross his desk every day. Most of it was ordinary, wealthy families insuring wealthy children against a danger that was unlikely but real, the way you'd insure a yacht against a storm that probably wouldn't come. The Callaway policy wasn't ordinary, 6 weeks old, one named beneficiary. Coverage tripled the same week a business magazine ran the engagement announcement photo. His firm's underwriting model hadn't flagged it because tripling coverage was illegal. It wasn't, but because the broker who'd pushed it through, a woman named Renata Cole, already had 2 other flagged files sitting in his archive, both families whose claims had closed a little too cleanly, a little too fast for his comfort. He didn't have proof of anything yet. He had a pattern and a decade-old reason he no longer let a pattern like this one sit in a drawer collecting quarters. His own sister's policy had been ordinary too once, until it wasn't. Until the firm holding it took 11 days to authorize a payout she didn't live long enough to need, and Emery had spent every year since making sure his own firm never again took 11 days for anything. So when an opportunity came through a contact he'd spent 2 months cultivating specifically because it orbited Renata Cole's circle, vague work, well paid, exactly the kind of job her associates tended to offer people willing to not ask questions, Emery didn't send an employee. He went himself under a name that wasn't his, to watch a job he didn't yet understand from the inside, hoping to end it before it became the kind of file with a body attached. He hadn't planned on the wrong girl coming through that door in the green necklace. He hadn't planned on the particular stillness in her face during that first proof-of-life call, the way she didn't cry, the way she listened to her own mother's voice like she was grading it for sincerity and coming up short. He'd planned to stay invisible. He understood, watching her, that the plan had a shelf life now, and that he was the one about to spend it. They kept me in a back room off the garage, a stained mattress, a bucket I refused to think about until I had no choice left. Nash brought food twice a day, more of it than the job required, and water before I ever had to ask. "You don't have to be kind to me," I told him on the second night. "I know how this works. Good cop keeps the hostage calm so she doesn't do anything that gets her hurt." "Maybe." He set the food down without looking at it, looking at me instead. "Or maybe you're not who this was supposed to happen to, and somebody in this room ought to be sorry about that, even if nobody upstream plans to be. That's a very specific kind of kindness for a kidnapper." "I contain multitudes," he said, so dry and unexpected that I laughed before I could stop myself, a real laugh this time, ugly and short, the first one that room had heard. He asked me once very seriously whether I'd ever picked a lock just to see if I could. No client, no job, just curiosity. When I said yes, more times than I could count, He said that might be the most reckless thing anyone had told him all week, and for a few seconds, in a room with no business being funny, it was. He told me, in pieces over the next 2 nights, that he'd done 4 jobs like this one before, real ones. The kind where he actually had to sit in rooms exactly like this. He didn't tell me why, not yet, only that each one cost him something he was tired of paying. I noticed he never once asked me anything about my family that he could have used against me. I noticed everything he did ask was about the locks in my workshop, the puzzle boxes, the specific, useless, beautiful mechanics of things nobody needed fixed but me. It was the strangest kindness I had ever been shown, a stranger in a garage giving me an hour a night where nothing about me was for sale. Doyle didn't like how the ransom timeline was moving. He said so loudly enough that I heard every word through a door that never fully closed. The negotiation for me was crawling compared to every other job he'd run. Somebody upstream kept asking for more time. Somebody upstream kept asking, specifically, whether the identification could still be corrected before the police report went final. They want to swap the paperwork, Doyle said, half disbelieving, half admiring, to one of the others. Like she's a rental car somebody picked up in the wrong color. I lay very still on that mattress and understood, in pieces, exactly what he meant. Not that my family wanted to physically trade me for my sister. That the money, whatever money this was, had my sister's name written on it somewhere I couldn't see yet, and had my name written on it nowhere at all. I also learned that same night that the detective assigned to my case had proposed pulling phone records from 3 staff members at the gala who might have seen who followed us out the side door. My father told him not to, said he didn't want anything complicating the timeline while the family was still deciding how to handle the press. A missing daughter, and my father's first instinct was to slow down the investigation that might find her, because finding her too fast, the wrong way, might not fit whatever version of this story he was already building. Nash came in an hour after the shouting outside had died down and found me staring at the ceiling instead of sleeping. "You heard all that," he said, "not a question. They're trying to figure out how to make it not matter that it's me." He sat against the wall across from the mattress, close enough to talk quietly, far enough to respect that I hadn't invited him closer. "I've never heard a family ask that question first," he said. "Not once in 4 jobs. Every other time, it's is she okay, before money, before logistics, before anything else. You should know that. Whatever they tell you later about why, you should know right now, while it's still just a fact and not an excuse yet, that it isn't normal." I held on to that sentence for 4 more days like it was the only solid thing in the room. I asked him, later that same night, why a man who did jobs like this one still had room left in him to be careful with a stranger's wrists. He was quiet long enough that I thought he wouldn't answer. "I had a sister," he said finally, "younger. She was insured too, once, the ordinary way people like your family get insured. The company holding her policy took 11 days deciding whether to authorize what she needed. She didn't have 11 days. He looked at the door instead of at me. I've spent a long time since then trying to make sure that number is never 11 again, for anyone. I'm not always on the side of it that I'd like to be. Tonight I'm choosing which side I'm on before it's too late to choose." I didn't ask him anything else that night. Some things you let sit exactly where a person sets them down. At the Calloway estate, Eleanor Calloway had not slept in a real bed in 3 nights, which was true, and which she mentioned to every reporter who called, which was also true, and which had almost nothing to do with the actual reason she wasn't sleeping. The policy requires proof of life within 96 hours of the incident, Renata Cole said again, over speakerphone, patient in the specific way of a woman repeating herself to a client too frightened to hear it the first 4 times. It doesn't specify which family member, Eleanor. It specifies the named insured. If the named insured isn't the one on the call, I can't make the underwriters behave. "Then fix it," Eleanor said. "I'm not a magician, I'm a broker." Vivian sat curled in the corner of the sitting room in a robe, having cried for a local news crew 2 hours earlier, her mascara reapplied twice for continuity between takes. She hadn't said much in 3 days. She said something now, quiet enough that her mother had to lean toward her to catch it. This wasn't supposed to happen to her. Eleanor didn't ask which her. She already knew Vivian meant Georgia, and some old, tired part of Eleanor Calloway understood exactly how much that sentence should have horrified her and found, to her own private shame, that it mostly didn't. No, Eleanor agreed it wasn't. Neither of them said the rest out loud, that whatever shape this plan had taken in the 6 weeks since the policy was quietly amended, It always assumed Vivian would be the one in danger, briefly, safely, on paper, a story to tell at future dinner parties about how close they'd all come. That Georgia wearing the necklace that night had been an accident nobody upstream had accounted for. That an accident this expensive needed correcting, and correcting it meant deciding, over herbal tea in a warm sitting room, whether one daughter's real danger mattered less than the other daughter's ensured danger. Vivian reached for her phone once, scrolled to a message from Renata Cole that had arrived that morning, a single line asking her to confirm, for the file, the exact date she'd first tried on the necklace, and typed a reply before she could talk herself out of it. She didn't show her mother. She told herself that was mercy. She would spend a long time later deciding it wasn't. They let me call home on the third day. Proof of life, Doyle called it, holding the phone himself, thumb hovering over the speaker button like a man conducting an orchestra he didn't respect. Mom? Georgia. My mother's voice cracked in exactly the right place, and some small, humiliated part of me wanted so badly to believe the crack was real and not rehearsed. Sweetheart, are you hurt? Are they? I'm okay, Mom, I just need you to know I'm. Did they say anything? Her voice dropped fast, urgent, the way it did when she was tried a question under a door before anyone noticed it opening. About the timeline, about whether there's still a way to. Doyle cut the call there, satisfied, already walking off. I sat holding a dead phone for a full 10 seconds before I understood what she'd almost asked me, her actual kidnapped daughter, in the 90 seconds she'd been given to confirm I was alive. Whether there was still a way to what? She never finished the sentence. Some nights since I've thought that not finishing it was its own kind of mercy, the last one my mother ever gave me for free. Nash was watching my face when Doyle handed the phone back to its charger. She didn't ask if I was okay, I said before he could ask. Not really. She asked if there was still a way to fix it. Fix what? I don't know yet. I found I meant it as a promise more than a confession. But I'm going to. The 96-hour window Doyle kept muttering about became a countdown I tracked by the color of light bleeding through one high, filthy window. Nash let the deadline slip on the third night, not meaning to, the way tired people let things slip when they're more worried about someone else's exposure than their own. There's a cutoff, he said, for the paperwork to still count. After that, whatever they're trying to arrange upstream, it stops mattering. What happens to me after it stops mattering? He didn't answer fast enough, and the not answering was the loudest thing anyone had said to me in 3 days. Doyle had started looking at me differently by then, less like cargo, more like a liability nobody upstream wanted to keep paying to store. He stood too close. He'd taken to running his thumb along the strap of a knife sheath at his belt, an idle, ugly little habit, and told Nash twice in front of me, like I was furniture that couldn't repeat things, that a mess was still cheaper than a delay. On the fourth night, Doyle came further than he had before. He crouched in front of my chair the way Nash had that very first hour, except nothing about it was careful. Your father's stalling, he said. You understand what that means for you, right? Every hour he spends trying to make the paperwork match your sister's name instead of yours is an hour I'm paying to keep you breathing for free. His thumb found the knife sheath again. I made myself hold still, the way you hold still around something that hasn't decided yet whether you're a threat or a nuisance. Watching him do it, I understood for the first time that the countdown he kept muttering about wasn't measuring my rescue. It was measuring my shelf life. Doyle, Nash's voice, from the doorway, flat and final in a way I hadn't heard from him before. Upstairs wants her intact until the deadline. You do the math on what happens to your cut if you're the reason she isn't. Doyle held the stare a moment longer than was comfortable for anyone in that room, then stood unhurried like leaving had been his idea all along. Clock's still running, he said to both of us, and left. Nash didn't sit across from me that night. He sat close enough that our shoulders nearly touched, which was its own kind of language in a room with no other kind left. I need you to trust me for the next stretch of this, he said. Not because I've earned it. I haven't, not really, I'm one of the people who put you in this chair. But because the alternative is worse for both of us. Worse how? If this goes the way Doyle wants it to go, I stop being able to live with the job I said yes to. He said it flatly, no performance in it anywhere, which was exactly why I believed him. I have a phone. One hidden, that isn't part of this crew's communications. I've been recording every call that comes through here for 6 days. I didn't want to bring you one bad phone call and call it proof. Anyone can have one bad hour. I needed a pattern before I asked you to burn down what's left of your family over it. I have that pattern now. I want to play you something, and then I want you to help me decide what happens with it." That was the night everything I understood about my family broke open for good. The recording was short. Renata Cole's voice, clipped and businesslike, in the tone she probably used for every family desperate enough to need her. "Preston, I understand this is difficult, but I need you to think about it practically. The claim as filed names Vivian. If Vivian isn't the one on the call, the underwriters have grounds to deny the entire payout, and without that payout, I don't see how the Kingsley deal survives the quarter." My father's voice next, thinned by 3 days of performing grief for cameras, asking the only question that seemed to genuinely matter to him: is there any way to make the file say what it needs to say? "That depends how much you're willing to risk to make it say that. I need this company, Renata, I need this merger. Whatever it costs." Not my name. Not once in 90 seconds of recorded conversation did my father say my name. A second clip followed, shorter, my mother's voice this time to Renata. "She's asking questions on the calls. Georgia, I don't think she suspects anything yet, but if the timeline slips again, I don't know how much longer I can keep her calm without telling her something." Keep her calm, not keep her safe. Calm like I was a symptom to be managed until the real problem, the money, got solved. I sat on that mattress and felt something in my chest go very quiet and very cold, the opposite of shattering, more like a door closing all the way for the first time. "They knew," I said. "Before any of this happened, they knew something like this might come up. That's not a parent panicking, that's a parent checking whether the insurance still pays out." Nash didn't try to soften it. I've thought about that more than almost anything else since, how much I needed him not to soften it. "Yeah," he said, "that's what I think too." I stopped crying somewhere in the middle of that night, not because as the grief ran out, but because I noticed something more useful sitting right next to it. I finally understood exactly what my family was afraid of losing, and it had never once been me. "I need 2 things, I told Nash once my voice came back steady. "I need to make my own call home. And I need you to tell me what's actually in that gray courier case Doyle keeps by the workbench, the one he checks on constantly and never opens in front of you." He raised an eyebrow, the first real surprise I'd seen cross his face in 4 days. "How do you know it's locked?" "Because I've heard him swear at it twice, and I know exactly the sound a beginner makes fighting a lock he doesn't understand. It's old. A lever mechanism, probably European pre-war." I held up both hands, calloused fingertips catching the bulb's light like the only proof of a whole life nobody in my family had ever taken seriously. "I fix these for a living. Or I did, before I became a Calloway daughter with a price tag stapled to the wrong sister." He studied me for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes I'd later learned to recognize as a man revising every assumption he'd made about a person in the space of one sentence. "It's Cole's case," he said slowly. "Doyle's supposed to deliver it to her sealed. Once this is finished, I don't know what's inside. I've been told not to ask." "Then let's both stop being told what to do." He got me to that workbench 20 minutes later, claiming I needed air, one hand loose around my zip-tied wrists in a way that would read as control to Doyle and felt, to me, like the opposite. The case sat under a service light, scuffed steel, a lock exactly as old as I'd guessed from the sound of it. I want to describe what it felt like to finally do the one thing I was actually good at, in a room built to make me feel worthless. My hand stopped shaking the second I touched the mechanism. Every other hour in that garage, my body had belonged to fear. For 11 minutes, it belonged to me. A Continental lever lock, older than either man, currently arguing 30 feet away about a car idling outside. I found the false gate on the 3rd pin, the trick lever mechanics like this one always hid to punish an amateur, and felt it give the way a good lock always gives, not a crack, a sigh, like it had been waiting for someone patient enough to ask it properly. 11 minutes. That was how long it took to open a lock nobody in my family believed I could, after 26 years of them being certain there was nothing in me worth unlocking. Inside, a policy amendment dated 6 weeks earlier, my father's signature notarized. Vivian's name typed into a beneficiary line that had visibly been altered from something else, the font just slightly different, the kind of correction only someone who restored antique documents for a living would notice on sight. Beneath it, a side letter on Kingsley holding stationery outlining what Harold Kingsley's people called in language so bloodless it almost impressed me, risk-sharing assurances tied to the merger's closing conditions. Professional habit, even here, even now. I photographed each page on the phone Nash had given me before I let myself fully read it, the way I always did before touching anything I couldn't undo. Proof on paper that this had been arranged, not predicted, arranged. I need to make that call now, I said. Doyle allowed it, distracted, snapping at someone on his own phone about the deadline slipping again. My mother picked up on the first ring, which told me she'd been holding the phone the entire time, waiting. It's me. Georgia, thank God, are you? I'm fine. Listen, I don't have long. I kept my voice soft, unthreatening, exactly the voice 26 years had trained into me. I heard some of what's been happening with the paperwork. If it's not Vivian's voice on the proof of life call, does that actually mess up the claim? A pause, just long enough to answer the question on its own. Sweetheart, you don't need to worry about the financial details right now, that's not. I'm not worried, Mom. I just want to understand. Renata said the underwriters might deny it if the names don't match. Is that true? Another pause, and then my mother, exhausted, frightened, and for one unguarded second forgetting entirely that the person on the other end of this call was her actual kidnapped daughter, and not a business problem she was managing, said the sentence that ended everything between us. We're working on a way to make it not matter which one of you it was. Please, Georgia, just don't say anything to the detective until your father and I have a plan. Beside me, Nash had already pressed record. We had, by Doyle's own muttering, maybe 12 hours left before whoever was upstream decided what to do with a hostage who'd stopped being useful. We had a recording, a signed policy amendment, and a side letter with the Kingsley name on it. Then Doyle found the career case open. He didn't shout. That was almost worse. He went very still, the specific stillness of a large man right before he stops being careful, and looked at Nash with an expression that did quiet arithmetic on exactly how long they'd actually known each other versus how much he'd chosen to trust him. You're not Muscle, Doyle said. Muscle doesn't ask this many questions. Who do you actually work for? Nash didn't lie, not this time. Voss Sentinel. The name meant nothing to Doyle, which would have been funny in any other room, in the way that only stops being funny once you remember the knife he'd been touching like a worry stone for 2 straight days. Give me the case, Doyle said, and whatever phone you've been hiding. Now. What happened next took less than 90 seconds, and I still can't tell it back in order. Doyle grabbing for the case. Nash stepping between him and me the way he had every single time since that first hour, except this time with nothing folded back into softness, all of it forward, all of it a wall. A radio crackling on Doyle's hip, one of the other 2 crew members reporting a car idling at the garage's rear access for 20 minutes, engine off, doing nothing but waiting. That's mine, Nash told him. Backup I called 4 hours ago. You've got about 90 seconds before this stops being a negotiation. Doyle looked at the case in Nash's hand at the door, at me, running the arithmetic of a man who'd built an entire career on knowing exactly when a job had gone past saving. He ran. I found out 3 weeks later that the paper copies from that case had been burned in a barrel behind the garage before police ever arrived, Doyle's last useful act before he was picked up 2 states away, trying to sell a story nobody wanted to buy. For one entire night, I believed the only proof of everything my family had done had gone up with that fire, and that Nash and I had traded a kidnapping for nothing at all. I didn't yet know about the phone he'd pressed into my coat pocket in the chaos, telling me, low and urgent, to keep it no matter what. I didn't know that the photographs already sat safe inside it, taken 20 minutes before Doyle ever found the case open. My own habit of documenting a mechanism before I touched it turned, without my quite planning it, into evidence. I also didn't know that Emery Voss had never actually needed the paper at all. His own firm had underwritten the original policy. The unaltered version, the one that existed before Renata Cole's amendment, sat untouched in Voss Sentinel's own archive the entire time, waiting for someone with the authority to pull it. The Callaways held a press event 9 days after my rescue, which they billed as a celebration of Vivian's resilience, because somewhere in that final week, with me safely home and Doyle's crew scattered across 2 states, my parents had decided the story could still belong to Vivian if they moved fast enough and nobody inconvenient showed up to say otherwise. Somebody inconvenient showed up. Emery Voss walked into that press room in a suit that had nothing to do with garages or motor oil, and for 1 full second, before I said a single word, I watched my mother's face do something I had never once seen it do in 26 years. Recognize fear that wasn't rehearsed. For those who don't know me, he said into a microphone nobody had offered him, my name is Emery Voss. I'm the principal of Voss Sentinel, which underwrites the kidnap and ransom policy currently being discussed in connection with this family. I'd like to correct the record before anyone celebrates the wrong daughter's survival. He laid it out clean, the way I'd learned he did everything. The policy amendment, dated 6 weeks before the gala. The side letter from Kingsley Holdings, its bloodless language about risk-sharing assurances printed in 3 newspapers by morning. A recording of Renata Cole discussing, with my father, whether the claims paperwork could be made to not matter which daughter had actually been taken. A second recording my own mother's voice, asking her actual kidnapped daughter to stay quiet until a plan could be built around her. The detective who'd caught my case originally, a patient, unhurried man named Alan Reyes who I'd assumed for 9 days had simply been slow, stood at the back of that room and, for the first time since this had started, looked like a man whose instincts had finally been allowed to be right. He'd wanted those staff phone records from the first night. Now he had a reason no one could tell him not to pull them. Renata Cole was arrested 11 days later, charged alongside Marcus Doyle, whose testimony, once a prosecutor gave him a reason to offer it, filled in every gap the burned papers had left behind. My father was charged with insurance fraud and conspiracy within the month, though the trial itself was still a year off. Callaway Textile Group didn't survive long enough to see the inside of a courtroom. My mother was named in the same filing as a co-conspirator, the recording of her asking me to stay quiet becoming, in the prosecutor's own words, evidence of consciousness of guilt. The Kingsley merger collapsed within the same week the story broke. Harold Kingsley's own lawyers moving fast enough to put visible distance between his name and my father's, whatever that distance cost the deal. Vivian's engagement ended in the same week, a fact the tabloids covered with considerably more relish than sympathy. Weston Kingsley called me himself once to apologize for a father-in-law he never got to have. I appreciated it more than I expected to and told him so and meant it. Vivian was the one who surprised me most. She stood up during that same press conference, before any reporter could ask her a single scripted question, and said, in a voice with no performance left anywhere in it, that she'd known about the policy amendment before the gala. That she hadn't understood it would become a real kidnapping, instead of an insured scare on paper. That she should have said something the moment she realized what our parents were willing to let happen to me to keep the arrangement quiet. She wore my necklace because I asked her to, Vivian said, looking directly into a camera instead of away from it. Not because it was an accident. I didn't want to be the one it happened to, even on paper. I didn't understand yet what that meant for her, and by the time I did, I was too afraid of what admitting it would cost me to say anything. It wasn't forgiveness, what I felt hearing that, but it was the first entirely true sentence anyone in my family had said about me in 9 days, and true sentences, I was learning, mattered to me now more than kind ones ever had. My mother did not speak at that press conference at all. She stood very still beside my father, and when a reporter finally asked her directly whether she had any statement for her daughter, she said only, "I'm glad Georgia is safe," in a voice so flat it finished the sentence her 3-day-old crying Jags never had. Safe was the word she'd needed all along, and even now, it came out sounding like an afterthought. The Carriage House workshop reopened that spring, under my own name this time, Georgia Callaway Restorations, stenciled on glass I paid for myself, with money that had never once passed through my father's ledgers. My first commission back was an ordinary thing, a widower's grandfather clock with a jammed chime, nothing dramatic, nothing anyone would ever put in a headline. I liked that about it. For the first time in my life, I was doing something valuable that nobody was watching to see whether I'd earned. Ruth Bennett, who had run the main house for 11 years and called me every single day I was missing without once being asked to, brought me coffee in the workshop most mornings now and never once asked if I was fine, because she'd learned, same as I had, that the question wasn't the point. Staying was. Emory came by on a Tuesday I hadn't told him about, which meant Ruth had probably told him herself. "I'm not undercover this time," he said from the doorway, like it needed clarifying. I noticed, better suit. He laughed, actually laughed, the sound taking up more space in that little room than I'd ever heard from him in a garage built for smaller feelings. Then he asked me the question nobody in my family had ever once thought to ask first, not in 26 years, not even in the 90 seconds they'd been handed to ask it on a monitored phone line. "What do you want, Georgia? Not what's useful. not what fixes anything for anyone else. What do you actually want? I thought about the necklace, sold at a small private auction 3 weeks earlier. The proceeds split between a scholarship fund for young conservators and nothing at all to do with my family's name. This, I said, meaning the workshop, meaning the doorway, meaning him standing in it without needing a single thing from me first. I want this. He crossed the room and touched my cheek with his thumb, careful of the grease still on my hands, and I understood, standing in a room my mother once called a phase out loud in front of 11 guests, that I had never actually needed anyone to come back for me. I had only ever needed someone to ask the right question first. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next story.